Welcome back to the Phoenix Nest. I'm your host, Zeke the Phoenix, and today we're talking about the Ranger Archetype in Ashes of Creation. Today we have my returning guest, Gundel, the leader of my guild, Mythic.
Hey guys, thanks for having me back. Hi Zeke, looking forward to talking about Ranger stuff, so, let's get into it.
Alright, let's continue our theory crafting discussion on what we might see with the subclasses of the Ranger. First, let's list off the names of each subclass. First, we've got the Strider, the Ranger Fighter, the Sentinel, the Ranger Tank, the Scout, the Ranger Rogue, the Hawkeye, the Ranger Ranger, the Sion, the Ranger Mage, the Falconer, the Ranger Summoner, the Soulbow, the Ranger Cleric, and finally, the Bow Singer, the Ranger Bard. First, let's talk about the Strider. What do you think about this class, Gundel?
I think as, a Lord of the Rings fan, and I'm sure many MMO players are, you get an instant picture of, Aragorn, and that kind of mentality. So I think using that comparison, you can kind of draw a conclusion to what possibly may happen. With the Strider class, that being, one that does moderate to high damage in close range while also wielding a bow and doing damage from long range. So you kind of get that hybrid system of melee and mobility along with the range potential.
Yeah, I thought that too. And besides the Lord of the Rings references, I also expect to see this being the de facto hit and run class. Do you think this class will have a lot of mobility?
I assume so, just because it'll probably try to reward players for using melee abilities and ranged abilities, so you're getting into the fight, disengaging, and using your ranged abilities. So I assume some fact of either mechanic or reward system for jumping between melee and range will be part of that class and be essential to playing that class well, mechanically.
Yeah, I hope they end up making subclasses different enough to each have some small mechanical differences to keep subclasses somewhat unique from each other. Next we've got the Sentinel. I'm kind of getting a turret vibe from this one. Sentinels tend to be guards on top of castle walls or at gates, and I'm expecting some of the augments to add defensive skills to their longer casts or defensive buffs, as well as likely seeing some control and utility augments. What do you think, Gundel?
So yeah, I think you're right. When it comes to more of a guarding class and things of that nature, every MMO player or most MMO players run into a Sentinel throughout their lifetime of playing MMOs. So we kind of get a gist of what that is. I think you are right that it'll be kind of a longer ranged or turret based in that sense of their abilities maybe procced off of ranged attacks and things of that nature for their buffs, or that their buffs will be at a larger radius because they are a Sentinel and they are protecting a certain area that they kind of plant down. And because of the Ranger augment, it will be a larger comparatively to a normal tank due to the fact of that augment.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see that sort of gameplay on a range class, as it's a fairly uncommon playstyle. Now, third on the list, we've got the Scout. Something in the name Scout tells me is that this will have augments that might detect behind walls, similar to the crossbow from the BR, and it might have augments that let you escape or initiate combat via short-term stealth mechanics. What are your thoughts on the Scout, Gundel?
What do I think about the Scout? I hate the name Scout. It irritates me as a range player and a rogue player and things of that nature. Hearing Scout refers to a base class, not an actual end class, so it irks me inside just from the years of experience playing that type of class. Scout, yeah, most likely will have a stealth mechanic or an invisibility mechanic that'll be part of their class tied to it. Most likely it will be longer ranged in the sense of sniper shot, things of that nature, where you have to be in stealth, use the attack that'll do a devastating damage. Scout also implies scouting out and locating areas, being able to manipulate and control the environment. So probably due to traps and things of that nature, whether it be hidden traps that'll play off of that kind of stealth mechanic, might also be a factor to that class. But my assumption is that it will have more to do with longer range than close range combat, unlike the Predator.
That's an interesting take on it. I overlooked them being a trapper for this one, and I wonder if they might have ways to mark things for their raid groups. That would create an interesting dynamic for group makeups if this ended up being a must-have for raids and PvP. Next up, we've got the Hawkeye, the Ranger. What do you think about this class, Gundel?
So Hawkeye, I believe, is going to be, you're doubling down on Ranger. So your ranged attacks are going to be very, very much more powerful. And the way that they can do that is one of two ways. Whether they give you increased range, so you're able to attack at a farther range, and then limiting the negative effects of the minimum distance requirement could also be a bonus or a boon to the Hawkeye class. The other option is instead of increasing the range, you increase the effectiveness of snares, traps, things of that nature to give it more of a kiting ability and more of a kiting class. Those are the two ways I can kind of see the Hawkeye being more powerful, because you are doubling down on those two aspects.
That's more or less what I was thinking. Maybe they get some heavy buffs to accuracy for tab target, and maybe some lock-on skills for action that can really keep your foes behind cover while you're unloading on them.
So yeah, I agree that there might be some lock-on abilities. They've already talked about in Castle Siege where you can have a homing arrow and you can lock on and pilot it and do that. They've also talked about the sniper shot, and when you charge it up, it could be more powerful and it could go through a projectile wall that a tank uses, and that. So it sets up unique situations where otherwise other classes and other subclasses, the ability would be blocked, but because you have a Hawkeye, you can kind of remove that ability from the normal kind of aspect. That way, you know, it brings that viability into that class and makes it kind of really, really powerful in that situation. But I do suspect that you will be really, really punished at close range, because you are doubling down on that ranged ability. So you will have maybe even all weak melee abilities that really won't be doing much in the way of the Hawkeye.
Yeah, I think that would bring a new meaning to the term armor penetration in MMOs. The next we've got the Sion. So the word Sion would suggest some relation to nature or ancestral magic. I would expect there to be elemental arrows, maybe an arrow that teleports you to what you hit with it. I'd like to see some exploding arrows as well as some utility arrows, like AoE frost arrows or an earth bola style arrow that could lock people down. What are your thoughts, Gundel?
So I think kind of hit the nail on the head there, Zeke. You know, the only other kind of thing that I can see is, instead of, you know, your jump back, your disengage ability, instead of it having like an animation and that, it could be a teleport back instantly or a teleport forward. Maybe it'll get rid of the instant nature of just going backwards. Maybe you'll have the ability to go forwards, left, right, giving that mobility aspect of that. I do expect, obviously, frost arrows and things of that nature to be attributed to your class, whether that be through your snares or things of that nature. I think this is going to be your very much your arcane mage, kiting mage, or kiting ranger, as it were. A lot of people kind of attribute this class to the arcane archer from, you know, Pathfinder and D&D. So they kind of have that high damage, you know, survivability kind of aspect, where they will do large amounts of damage, whether it be arcane damage because they're doubling down with the mage ability, attributed to their class. So you could have the fire, you know, or arcane or lightning or whatever attributed to your arrow attacks that could cause paralysis, could cause, you know, dot damage, could cause, you know, snares like we talked about before, or even poison or countless other different types of magic. I very much look forward to seeing what this class actually entails, because it really does pique my interest. But I do expect that they will be squishy. I think they'll be the squishiest out of all of the ranger classes, just because they are doubling down on two ranged ability classes. Therefore, I think your close range is going to be very, very weak. And I think once you get locked down and picked off, you will very much die. I think this is very much going to be your glass cannon build.
Yeah, I think we really nailed the Sion. Next, let's talk about the Falconer.
So I think this is going to be your traditional D&D kind of style, or most people are going to be familiar with the hunter from WoW, where a lot of it was class management, was based off of your pet, especially the Beastmaster class. I think you'll have a lot of utility tied to your class based off of your pet. So a lot of the hunters will remember Roar Sacrifice, Mortal Strike, things of that nature that really kind of made your class its own. I think you're not going to have huge amounts of damage output. I think you'll have consistent damage along with a lot of that damage coming from your pet rather than you, and you'll be controlling with a lot more CC with your abilities and snares and traps and things of that nature, while your pet does the forefront of most of your damage, which could be really, really interesting depending on how Intrepid does it. If they create lines and things of that nature for your pet to go down, kind of like what WoW did with their pet system of creating more tank-like, more DPS-like, more control-like pet classes within the pet that you've tamed and created. Now, I think that would be really cool to see, but I think along the lines of pet classes, you're going to be more of a utility-based class rather than a straight-up damage class.
Yeah, and I'd like to see whether this class ends up being forced into using falcons only, or if they can use other types of animals, maybe just other types of birds, but we'll see. Alright, Gundel, how about the Soulbow?
For the Soulbow, I kind of think it's going to be a lot more based off of your utility aspect, and that'll be the true nature of this class. When you have the augment with the cleric, healing comes to mind, right? Through talking with Steven and what we've got all the information on, it'll either be minor healing or major healing. My assumption is it will be a lot of secondary healing, not primary healing. When it comes to action combat and things of that nature, it would be really cool to see more of like an Ana from Overwatch kind of style of healing, where you're using ranged shots to heal your allies and things of that nature. I think would be kind of really cool to see. For the damage output and things of that nature, I can see a lot of like dot damage and some small insta damage, but you will be primarily either buffing or removing curses and things of that nature is kind of what I see from a longer range, hopefully, is what I gather from the Soulbow.
Yeah, I'm kind of expecting this to end up being an anti-healer in that same vein, or someone who can throw out debuffs that reduce or outright prevent healing at range. It kind of reminds me a bit of Lethality Sniper from SWTOR. I'm hoping it's something along those lines. The last class on the list is Bowsinger. This one, I think, might also be able to mark targets to deal more damage for your team. Similar to what I said about the Scout earlier, it would be like a shot caller for your team. As well as maybe having access to augments that buff or debuff yourself and enemies with buffs to increase range damage, give additional range, or debuffs that reduce vision or accuracy, similar to how the short bow functioned in the BR as a blind. What do you think about that, Gundel?
So I think you're kind of right when it comes to the Bowsinger about the debuffing aspect. I think it very much will be a ranged debuffing class, whether it be vision, whether it be mitigation, or decreasing physical or magical damage through their attacks. I also think that this class is very much going to be a kite class. Bowsinger, to me, reminds me a lot of what Trube and Dirge was in EverQuest 2, where you could sing a lot of attacks, and you'd have like silences on your bow shots. You were very much an annoying class to deal with. You weren't high damage, but you had so much utility and so many different ways on how to attack a problem and attack different classes. And you had so much raid viability due to the debuffs that you brought and the increases of buffs that you brought, that you were always raid viable. So for this class, I don't think you're going to be, your super high damage, but you're going to have, silences, things to annoy your enemies, whether it be mitigation decreases or just actual CC effects, on top of having moderate to damage at range, that you will be able to kite people for long distances and long periods of time, which can really, really annoy players. I hopefully, Intrepid really does take a good look at this class, because I really find that a lot of players that are going to want a 1v1, and they get good at range, we'll probably be looking towards this class to do that.
Alright, that's all the subclasses we have on the Ranger. Any final thoughts, Gundel?
So the big thing to take away from is that the range class is about kiting, or should be about kiting, and maximizing that range damage while minimizing the chance of your enemies getting close to you and having that minimum distance requirement that Steven is very adamant about having. That will really tell the good players and the good range players in all aspects from the bad players, because the optimal damage and things of that nature will be obviously from range. Depending on your augment, depending on where you go from there, can really maybe shape playstyle and the flavor of how you do it. But the general premise is you're always going to want to try to stay at range, try to min-max that distance, and really try to keep people from getting you in that dead zone of that 5 minimum distance requirement. The big thing that Intrepid really needs to do well is give range players the ability to kite, but also allow the melee classes a chance to attack that opening and that weakness when the range players are playing poorly. By doing this, you're not going to create a meta where range players can kite people to death the entire time. You'll have severe problems when it comes to that meta because everyone will play ranged. What the Intrepid needs to do is focus on creating windows of opportunity for melee to attack. The range classes, what I want them to take away is finding and working on your kiting ability and your strafing, because I really truly believe that should be a skill that all ranged players have, whether it be a ranger, whether it be a mage, or that going forward, because you can create a lot more opportunities and be more successful in the game as a whole by actually improving your strafing and your kiting.
I know Ranger is one of my top alternatives this far, and I hope Intrepid really nails all these class fantasies. Hopefully these class fantasies are diverse enough to allow high skill players an opportunity to excel, and display to lower skill players what to strive for by having these short windows of high risk, high reward in order to improve. Thanks for being my guest again for this video, Gundel.
Thanks for having me, Zeke. I always love talking about theorycrafting and stuff.
I hope you all enjoyed our ideas and speculation on the Ranger Archetype, and tune in for more theorycrafting videos as we continue this series. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below, and I'll see you when you return to the nest.